At one time, the phrase, "What would Jesus do?" or WWJD for short, was all the rage. People wore WWJD stretchy plastic bracelets and t-shirts inscribed with the letters. Driving around, one might have seen a bumper sticker on cars asking WWJD. For Christians, it's not a bad mindset, wondering what Jesus would do in a given situation. Though just like sometimes people say, "I'll pray for you," in a passive-aggressive way, that sometimes happens with "what would Jesus do?" The phrase sometimes became judgmental. So it's pretty funny to look at internet memes of WWJD. Maybe this is something nerdy that pastors just do, but it's pretty funny. We could easily find a picture of Jesus driving the money changers from the temple, and the caption reads, "If anyone ever asks you, what would Jesus do? Remind them that flipping over tables and chasing people with a whip is within the realm of possibility." And it's true. Jesus really did this. Jesus thought that the temple sacrificial system in Jerusalem was unjust and exploited the poor. So he wanted to send a message. The animals that were present for sacrifice had to be unblemished and pure. Foreign currencies had to be exchanged for the official half shekel of the temple tax. Jesus didn't like some of these practices, so he drove the sheep and the cattle away with a whip of cords. He poured out all the coins that the money changers had collected from this enterprise. Jesus then overturned the tables on which they would conduct their business, and he tells the people who were selling doves, the only animal the poorest of the poor could afford, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." Now, in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this episode takes place at the end of Jesus' ministry. This was the event that sealed Jesus' fate. And how it's presented in the Synoptics is probably the most historically accurate representation of what happened and when. Jesus had this dramatic upheaval of that temple sacrificial system right around Passover, when Jews, including himself and his disciples, would travel from all over the countryside to Jerusalem to observe this holy festival. Passover was a week-long festival in the spring where people celebrated the exodus from Egypt and the harvest of barley. It was a celebration that expressed the themes of liberation from oppression and divine salvation. People would gather in Jerusalem, and the city would have been bustling with people and activity. There would have probably been extra Roman soldiers on hand to keep the peace. If there was one thing the Romans hated more than anything, it was rabble-rousers who disturbed the Pax Romana, the peace of the Roman Empire. And this Jewish festival that celebrated themes of liberation from oppression would have made these Roman soldiers really on guard, since they were foreigners occupying this nation. So here comes Jesus into this charged religious and political atmosphere, going into the temple complex and causing a scene. Overturning tables, releasing sacrificial animals, using a whip, yelling at those taking advantage of the poor, "Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." It's no wonder that this was the event that led to his crucifixion, because those in power couldn't overlook the message that Jesus was sending here. This dramatic display of disapproving economic exploitation of the least of these made the Romans and Jewish leadership realize just how troublesome this Jesus of Nazareth was. And for them, Jesus had to go. But in the Gospel according to John, John uses this story to set the tone for the remaining gospel. This event happens in chapter 2 of John's gospel to put us on alert for the signs to come. It's a little weird to be preaching this lectionary text on the third Sunday in Lent. Yet that's when it appears this year. And so we're talking about this event early. Though it's so interesting because in John, this story is Jesus' big first-time public appearance. Can you imagine that? This is the first time Jesus is in public announcing his ministry, and this is what he does. It's right after the wedding in Cana, where Jesus turned water into wine. And it foreshadows the destruction of the elite of society's center of power, Jerusalem itself. The Romans will sack the city in 70 CE, and they will destroy that temple that had taken so many years to build. Overturning the tables this early in the gospel makes us all sit up and pay attention. We are going to see some pretty amazing signs of Jesus' power in the pages to come. Jesus is going to face opposition from those in power right away who do not appreciate him and what he represents. What will seal Jesus' fate in the Gospel of John, though, it's not this temple episode. It's raising Lazarus from the dead. Resurrection and new life may be more frightening to some people than disturbing the peace. So whenever this may have happened, Jesus' actions bring up a larger question of the merits of righteous indignation. Aristotle, of all people, once said, "Anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy." Though we can perhaps use the term righteous indignation here instead of anger or even righteous anger because it seems more accurate. Indignation is a specific kind of anger. It's anger that's provoked by unfair treatment. When others are denied dignity and respect, indignation is a justified response. We're supposed to love God, love one another, and love ourselves. Witnessing people's dignity denied, it must affect us. There are traditions of righteous indignation that Jesus was drawing upon when he made this public display in the temple. If we keep in mind that Jesus was rooted in the Jewish prophetic tradition, we can see similarities with other prophetic figures. Moses got so mad at the golden calf mishap that he smashed the tablets that contained the 10 Commandments on the ground, and he literally had to go back up the mountain to receive them again. John the Baptist used to call people broods of vipers. Vipers are venomous snakes that sometimes eat each other. It's not exactly a nice sentiment to express. Prophets would get indignant when they saw injustice in the world, and they weren't afraid to just call it out. So we do such a disservice to Jesus' actions in the temple if we don't put him in line with this prophetic tradition. He wasn't just going in and having a hissy fit. He wasn't just going in because he had a bad day. He was going in because he was telling people that he didn't like what he was seeing, because people were getting exploited. After all, Jesus probably traveled to Jerusalem every single year with his disciples for Passover. And this event, if we're to believe the Synoptic Gospels anyway, this might have happened at the end of the 3rd year of his ministry. So this display of righteous indignation was purposeful and deliberate. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing in standing up for those who got taken advantage of by people in power. Frankly, we could even argue that Jesus was in line with Aristotle's definition of appropriate anger. Jesus was angry with the right people, probably to the right degree. He was angry at the right time and for the right purpose, and maybe even in the right way. He wanted to send a message. He wanted to take a stand. Jesus ultimately paid with his life to show us the ways of compassion and justice, that exploiting people isn't okay and not how God intends us to live. Not when Jesus was teaching kingdom values, that the first will be last and the last will be first. And we are called as his followers to question and do something about unjust societal practices. This witness was costly. It was costly back then, and it can be costly now. So what makes us indignant? When we look around at our families, community, nation, and world, what are the issues that cause us to feel angry because of unfair treatment that people are experiencing? They won't be the same for every person. Though if anyone ever says, you're a Christian and you need to just chill out about social justice issues, we can look to the example of Jesus, who got indignant about people being economically exploited by those in power, and literally poured money on the ground, overturned tables, and drove animals away using a whip. Getting indignant to stand up for those is part of our Christian faith. We're supposed to look out for the lost and the lonely, those who are hurting and need a helping hand. Getting indignant and standing up for people who are being demeaned doesn't always have to be dramatic either. Bullying is a big problem in our society. Given technology and social media, there's cyberbullying. Technology isn't all bad, but it's not like people only experience being demeaned in person anymore. Some things that people wouldn't say to one another face to face, they'll put in an email, a text, a tweet, or on social media in general. Words said with bad intentions can be hurtful and stay with us. And just like Nicole with the tube of toothpaste, they can't be put back. A simple way that elementary schools sometimes use to combat bullying these days is called a buddy bench. If kids are out playing during recess and find that there's nobody to play with, they can sit on the bench. And it's a sign to other kids to invite them to come play. I believe there's a buddy bench at Colchester Elementary, and that some of the kindness rocks are permanently displayed underneath as a further invitation to be kind. It's a simple way to think about the needs of others and to prioritize compassion. We can't assume that these are values that kids automatically know, to reach out to the person who sits alone at lunch or look to the bench to see somebody who may just want to play. Adults don't even always do a great job of welcoming one another. Sometimes I think adults need buddy benches just as much as children. In the end, we need reminders. We need to remember that we are called to reach out in love to others. We're allowed to be indignant when dignity is denied to our fellow children of God. We're maybe even called to get indignant. That call doesn't have to be in the form of flipping over tables like Jesus did in the temple. That call can be in the form of simply reaching out a hand. May it be so with us. Amen.